Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello and welcome back to the podcast from Kyiv. It's a great pleasure to introduce to you my guest this week. His name is Oleksandr Merezhko. He is a professor of international law, now an MP and member of President Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. He chairs Verkhovna Rada's Foreign Affairs Committee. Ukrainians listening, please forgive all my imprecise pronunciations. Now, Oleksandr is an interesting figure in Ukrainian politics because he is one of the few to speak very openly about the country's policy towards China and Taiwan. He co-chairs the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, and it's through this organisation that we met this week when I was permitted to sit in on a meeting that he held with Ian Duncan Smith, the former Conservative Party leader in the UK, who helped found IPAC. We cover a lot of ground in this interview about Ukraine's future place in NATO, whether a coalition of the willing is needed, and the astonishing scenes in Kyiv this week when President Zelensky sought to politicise the two anti-corruption bodies, sparking the first wartime protests across the country and the first political crisis of his presidency. If you're not up to speed on that story, you can head to my Substack, www.latikamberg.com, and read all about that. It is a very significant development, what happened in Ukraine this week. Let's get into the interview. I began by asking Oleksandr Merezhko how he felt about Ukraine's fortunes, given Donald Trump's shifting attitude towards Vladimir Putin.
Well, of course, we're seriously concerned because so far the United States has been our staunch ally and friend. And we relied a lot on the support of the United States, especially when it comes to providing military assistance, because there are such kind of weaponry which Europeans don't have. And our security, our safety, especially of our civilians, heavily depends on American weapons, especially when we're talking about air defense, like Patriot systems. And of course, certain inconsistency on the part of the President Trump caused serious concerns, especially when there was a stop in terms of providing weapons to Ukraine. But now I see that situation has somewhat stabilized. Now Trump continues to support Ukraine. It's a different model compared with the previous administration because our European friends will be buying weapons from the United States for us. But even despite this, it's still a win-win situation for both for Trump, for the United States, for Ukraine, and of course for our European partners.
You've had a changing, let's say, view of President Trump. You, at one hand, had high hopes. You submitted a Nobel Peace Prize nomination, then you withdrew it. How would you say you feel about him now? Deserving of the nomination still, or to be seen?
It's the problem is that he's too inconsistent. You know, one day he says one thing which looks encouraging, inspirational. The other day he might say the opposite. And this is a true problem because honestly, it undermines credibility of a politician and the whole country when you're inconsistent. But I knew that Trump was going to be elected like maybe a year before it happened. So I was prepared for that. And I knew that from different sources, actually. And I thought that we need to be prepared. It would be great for us at that time. Unfortunately, we missed this chance, but we should have established closer relations with him or with his team. And I tried to do it. We had contacts, for example, with Heritage Foundation or with Elbridge Colby, one of his supporters at that time. But seems like our establishment was not quite prepared. But for me, this nomination, it was more about expressing our hope that he has potential to bring true peace, just peace, based on international law and the UN Charter. And for me, it was expression of my hope that instead of policy of appeasement of the aggressor, he will pursue the policy which was pursued by Reagan, for example, from the position of strength in support of territorial integrity of Ukraine. But unfortunately, he behaved in a very kind of controversial way. I mean, his statements, this very unpleasant situation in the Oval Office, which made me to think about to withdraw or not. And the last straw was when he established this deadline, 2 weeks, and he didn't follow through on his promise. And after that, especially when there was a couple of nights when Kyiv was heavily bombed and there was no reaction from the White House, absolutely, as President Trump ignored what was going on. And for me, psychologically, it was kind of maybe emotional move. And on one of these days, in the morning after having bombardments of Kiev, I took this decision and I withdrew my nomination of President Trump. But luckily, he's changing now, somewhat. I'm afraid, I don't know how consistent he's going to be again, but I'm trying to be cautiously optimistic about this. But besides my nomination, he has lots of other people who have nominated him, like Prime Minister of Israel, for example.
We spend a lot of time when we discuss Ukraine's future tying it to the whims of whoever is in the White House. Is there a future you can see where Ukraine defends itself if it has to?
We are prepared for the worst case scenario, because we don't have any other choice.
What is a worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario is that if we don't get enough weapons from the United States, especially air defense, because for the United States, it's just a weaponry. For us, it's about human lives, especially civilians. We're right now in Kyiv. And if there were no air defense provided by the US, there would be thousands and thousands of civilian casualties, almost each week or maybe even each day. So, of course, it's the worst case scenario. Also, if we don't get material support from our European partners and military assistance. But luckily, I'm always comparing our situation with the situation of the UK in 1940. And we're in better situation because at that time, the UK was truly alone, without support. We are not alone right now. We have the UK, first of all, and your support, and we truly appreciate it because even though we are so geographically so far apart, but we are true friends. I have never been to your country, but each time I talk to people, members of parliament, or all kinds of people coming to Kyiv from Ukraine or meeting them abroad, I feel this empathy, this warmth of your hearts in support of Ukraine, and it means a lot for us. So we're lucky in this regard. We also have a strong coalition of our supporters. First of all, I call them frontline states like Baltic states, like Poland, because they understand what might happen.
Although Poland is wavering, and we see a different mood in Czechia coming up with the election, Slovakia and Hungary clearly not predisposed towards Ukraine. There is a potential where parts of Europe could actually turn against Ukraine.
Well, in case of Poland, I'm absolutely confident that they will continue to support us for a very simple reason. Because it's in their national interests. They understand that if we fall, they will be next. They don't want to have borders with Russian Empire. They understand it. No matter who is elected as a president, he will continue to support Ukraine. Maybe it might be the issue of the scale of this support. Yes, but I'm very optimistic about Poland. The case of Hungary is truly disturbing because it's more about selfish policy of Orban, personally, because I don't believe that Hungarian people, they remember 1956. They know what it's like. It's in their genes, in their historical memory. They know what it's like to have aggression of Russia. So I believe that they support Ukraine, but Orban, he's authoritarian kind of leader, and he's flirting with Russia and China for the sake of some material benefits, cheap Russian oil and gas, for example. It's very dishonest policy with regard to Hungary itself and its true national interests. And we have to take it into consideration, unfortunately.
You have said that you are not alone, Ukraine, because you have support from Britain and all your other friends, including Australia. Is Russia alone? Or do they have friends who are facilitating Russia to kill Ukrainians?
It's a very interesting question, and there is a huge difference because I can absolutely confidently say that Ukraine has friends. Russia doesn't have friends, but it has allies. What I mean by that, I mean North Korea, I mean Belarus, Lukashenko regime, I mean Iran, and I mean China. So Russia has allies which are trying to destroy existing liberal democratic order or rules-based order with the leadership of the United States as a leader of free world. So I would even say not allies, accomplices. Maybe it's a more correct term to use. And one of them is China. And China is not, it openly declares that China is not interested in defeat of Russia. And China is doing everything it can to provide lifeline to Russian war machine against Ukraine. And there is a huge danger. So it would be a mistake to view this war as only a war of one country against the other. We have two coalitions. And against Ukraine, we have coalition of Russia, China, North Korea, Belarus. And let's not forget that, for example, such countries as Cuba also providing soldiers, mercenaries, yes, but they also support propagandistically Russia in Latin America. So we're fighting against a huge coalition of totalitarian or authoritarian regimes.
Why is Ukraine so silent on China then?
We might have several reasons for that. Recently, we have started to talk about this openly. But before, maybe our hope was that China somehow can be helpful in terms of stopping Russia. Maybe it was naive, maybe it was illusion, but in the beginning, we know that Putin is afraid of only and takes into consideration only two great powers, the United States and China. And China, if China wanted, it could stop Russia. They didn't stop Russian full-scale aggression. Chinese dictator had green-lighted this aggression. I understand this perfectly well. And China helps a lot by providing, for example, commodities of dual use, which help Russia to produce weaponry, drones, and so on. And China, by buying Russian oil and gas, thereby it feeds and finances Russian war machine. Without Chinese help, Russia would not be able to continue the war of aggression against Ukraine.
Do you think that is widely understood in Ukraine?
It is understood. It is understood and understood by our leadership. And besides, Ukraine is a candidate. We want to become a NATO member. And NATO, in a very clear way, has described what People's Republic of China is doing and its role in Russian aggression against Ukraine. And I quote one of the NATO documents, which describes China as the decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine. And it's very true. I always quote this phrase because it's very correct and very clear-cut characteristic of China.
So let's go back to the original question. Where is Ukraine's pressure on China? Do you have any to apply, or is it a self-imposed timidity here?
We are trying to be maybe overly careful with China for political reasons, because maybe we understand we're trying not to make situation worse, maybe. I'm not sure whether it's a correct path or not, diplomatically speaking.
This sounds like the way many democracies have tried to deal with China for the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely. But, sometimes parliamentary diplomacy or members of parliament, they can be more blunt than compared with our official diplomacy. Yes, and for example, if we take the case of Taiwan, for instance, yes, and we have a group of members of parliament who support Taiwan because it's a democratic state. And we need to have democratic solidarity. And we understand that despite this geographic difference, everything is closely intertwined in politics. And the fate of Taiwan depends on Ukraine and vice versa. And that's why we need to continue to improve and to make closer relations between our countries, between Ukraine and Taiwan. And members of parliament understand this, and some of them are trying to act in this direction.
What is Ukraine's relationship with Taiwan currently?
We don't have even representative office of Taipei in Ukraine, which is weird because even Russia has it. Ukraine still doesn't have it. All other countries like Poland, they even have a couple of agreements concluded with Taiwan. For me, a good example is Lithuania. They have been always brave on this issue. The Czech Republic also.
But they both got punished.
Yes, it's true. But, I believe that we need to be supported by other democracies. We need also to support other democracies. And when we support Taiwan, we send very strong signal that we are on the right side of not only history, democracy. Democracy. I strongly believe in this democratic solidarity, and we need to develop this.
There's been a proposal led by France and the United Kingdom for a coalition of the willing to help preserve any peace that might be struck between Ukraine and Russia. Do you want to see French, British, even Australia as volunteer troops now? Do you want to see those boots on the ground in Ukraine?
Every kind of European Western presence on our soil, it's a sort of security guarantee for us. It's absolutely right and good thing to do. It enhances our security. Of course, I would like to see our allies, their boots on the ground, on the Ukrainian soil. But at the same time, the only reliable guarantee for us remains NATO membership.
But this is off the table. It has been made so clear by both the United States, and I hate to say it, but your friends closer here in Europe, Germany doesn't want this either. Aren't you chasing a pipe dream?
We have no choice but to continue to insist and to keep knocking on the door. I would like to recall this metaphor used at the Bucharest NATO summit, that the doors of NATO are open for Ukraine and Georgia, and we're still knocking on this door. And to be safe, to be saved from the maniac, all they have to do just to open these doors. And even though some European American leaders might continue to say that it's off the table, we don't have the right to agree with that. We need to continue to insist, because in the beginning, many things looked as a mission impossible. But later on, gradually, under persuasion, sometimes pressure, our partners have been changing their approach to Ukraine. I can recall, for example, weapons provided by Germany. In the beginning, it also looked impossible, out of the question. Germans were ready to provide us with 5,000 helmets, hospital, and this is it. Later on, they started to provide us with weaponry. In the beginning, it looked impossible and off the table. F-16, the same story. It always starts with no, then it moves to maybe, and finally we get yes from our partners and allies. So we should continue to work on this issue.
How soon do you believe you can join the European Union? And is there a world where European Union membership and not NATO is acceptable?
The best guarantee is, of course, NATO membership. But for me, membership in the EU, I call it second best guarantee of our security. Because Putin, for example, officially he is against Ukraine joining NATO, but of course it's not up to him to decide. It's our sovereign right. We don't impose on Russia whether they should join this or that international organization. They have their own security alliance, and we don't dictate them. And under international law and the principle of sovereign equality, we expect our right, sovereign right, to be respected. So it's not up to Russia. And at the same time, we need a kind of understanding from our allies in the EU that EU membership is a security issue for us. And the sooner it happens, the better for Ukraine, because Putin, he's afraid of solidarity, transatlantic solidarity and solidarity within the European Union. If we join the EU, and I believe that it might be a political decision, if we join the EU, we'll be much more safe. I can give an example of Finland. For many years, Finland was not a member of NATO, but it was a member of EU. And Putin didn't dare to attack Finland because he understood that this war would be war against not only Finland, but against the whole Union, against sort of federation, even European federation. And he was very careful. So that's why it's in our best interest to join the European Union as soon as possible.
You said earlier Ukraine is lucky to have partners and allies. I actually think we're the lucky ones to have Ukraine as our partner and ally. But I do think Ukraine has to show the world that it's deserving of the support that it's being sent. And this week, we have seen your president sign a very disturbing law that triggered protests. I went to some of these protests, and the young students on the street told me this is not the Ukraine I thought we were fighting for. I want freedom and a future that looks European, Ukrainian, and not Russian. Have you made a mistake? And have you jeopardized the support that we give you as well?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer for a very simple reason, because as a member of faction, there is such a thing as a party discipline. And I'm trying to support all presidential initiatives and to vote with my colleagues, even when I disagree with something.
Did you vote for this?
Yes, I did. I did, even though I understood what might be the consequences. I talked to my colleagues about this. I raised some concerns and doubts about this. Nevertheless, I did it, fully understanding what the consequences might be for Ukraine. But in the long run, I still believe in the common sense that it will prevail. The thing is that taking this decision, we should have understood what kind of consequences might be in terms of continuing support of Ukraine. On the one hand, I understand that this support will not stop for a very simple reason, because we're in difficult situation, yes, and our European allies will continue. But on the other hand, there might be problems for our image. But I strongly believe in independence of anti-corruption bodies. I believe in this, and I'm trying to support this. At the same time, I believe that maybe there is a need in a kind of dialogue and understanding between, on the one hand, the president of Ukraine, on the other hand, our partners, allies in Europe, especially G7 countries, and civic society in Ukraine. But for what we have right now, we have a hope that in a very near future, president will come up with a new law, which will be, I don't know, maybe kind of compromise, but in any case, it will uphold the independence of anti-corruption bodies.
Do you feel like you personally made a mistake in supporting this law?
I'm not sure. I thought a lot before taking this decision. It was quite unexpected. Honestly, I didn't have much time. And I was thinking a lot about after. And, sometimes you have to, even when you understand that the decision is not correct, it might bring some difficulties and you have serious doubts, but sometimes, after all, it's a teamwork. And I'm trying to be a loyal member of a presidential team because we're a presidential party and presidential faction. And we try to support all presidential initiatives. So from the perspective of teamwork, I think that I was right, despite all my doubts. And in the long run, I believe that the president will take the right decision on that.
What does the rest of the world need to know about Russia that you Ukrainians know uniquely?
Great question, because what is obvious for us is not that obvious, for example, my American colleagues. And I always say that you should come, for example, those American congressmen or senators who had visited Ukraine before, they understand everything. We have problems with those who have never been here. That's why, by the way, it's crucially important for President Trump himself to come to Ukraine. It would change a lot in his understanding.
And you think he would be very welcome here, right?
Yeah, definitely. Despite everything, he is very popular in Ukraine.
Is he?
I'm sure that he will be greeted with huge enthusiasm because he might be controversial, but he's like a rock star of politics. And he's popular. He is a charismatic person.
So is your president.
Yeah, they have a lot in common, by the way. And it gives me hope that sometimes when people have a lot in common, they might have some misunderstandings. But on the other hand, they also can get along. To me, the key to that is to have more communication between both presidents. If they had it on systematic way, maybe even on a daily basis, I'm sure that there wouldn't be any problems like that. So I do hope that he will come. But with regard to your question, what people in the West should know, they should know that Russians and Ukrainians are very different because we're people, we love freedom. Sometimes we might be even anarchistic because we distrust the government. We change by way of elections, governments and parliament very often. And Russians are different. They are unfortunately imperialistic. They are ready to sacrifice their lives in the name of Tsar, in the name of empire, and it's a huge difference. Putin himself, he is not a sophisticated strategist. It's a mistake to overthink about his capabilities, intellectual or strategic capabilities. In reality, he is a very primitive bully. And he behaves as a bully, and the only way to deal with him is to all his provocations, because he's provocateur, and he uses provocations a lot. The only way to deal with him is not by negotiations, is not by persuasion, by trying to use rational arguments. It doesn't help. From the position of strength, if he does something, if he commits a new crime, you should respond with more resolve. This is only thing which can stop him and to make him think twice before he commits a new crime against Ukraine or a new provocation.
Do you believe you are in a war against Putin or Russia?
We are in the war against Russia and its accomplices. Well, again, some mass media use the term Putin's war. It's not correct. It's Russia's war.
So this threat is everlasting.
I think yes. I think at least while Putin stays in power. If he's removed by Russian elites, there is no guarantee that the war will stop, but it creates a window of opportunities. Because we remember from history, after Stalin's death, there were some changes in Soviet Union. Because the death or removal from power of dictator entails infighting, elite, a struggle for power. It's inevitable. So it might create some opportunities for us to stop Russian aggression. But more than 80% of Russians support Putin. And Russia is collective Putin, unfortunately, because all these atrocities, they were not committed in the territory of Ukraine like Bucha, Irpin. They were not committed by Putin personally. They were committed by Russians. And we have lots of interceptions of conversations between Russian soldiers and their relatives, their wives. And it's shocking to listen to them when a wife encourages her husband to rape Ukrainian women. But unfortunately, it's typical. It's typical for Russians, for Russia. And in the West, they should understand this, that right now there is no difference between Russia, Russians, and Putin, unfortunately. It's like it can be compared only to Hitler's Germany, the same situation. That's why the problem will remain even after Putin's removal from power, and that's why we need de-Putinization of Russia or denazification of Russia in the same way it happened after the collapse of Hitler's Germany.
Given that, and given the growing relationship with China, doesn't this mean we're all in the same existential battle then?
Yes, absolutely. Because what we have now, I don't know whether we already can call it a third world war, but it's definitely a global war. Because totalitarian regimes, they have their own solidarity, they stick together, and their goal is to destroy the West, and to destroy leadership of the United States as a leader of the West and leader of the free world. So we are in the same boat, we are behind the same front line with the Western countries, European countries, EU, the UK, the United States, and all democratic states in the world, in all regions, like Australia, for example, like New Zealand. And interestingly, when we have meetings with Australian parliamentary delegations or New Zealand delegations, even though they're so far away, it's like different planet, but they are very helpful, very supportive. And the question why they're supportive? Because they understand that we have common values, we fight for common values, and Ukraine's security also for Australia. And potential adversaries of such countries as Australia, I mean, for example, China or North Korea, they're doing everything to undermine the global order and international law.
I want to end on a positive note. I've been in Ukraine this week and it's been a phenomenal experience. But it's also, of course, been so tragic because I can see very clearly what Russia is robbing from you. You have this vibrant young society, a very sophisticated capital city. Your country is absolutely raring to go places. What is the Ukraine that if you and I sat down in 10 years' time and all goes well, what is the Ukraine you see for yourself?
In the long run, paradoxically maybe speaking, but in the long run, I'm optimistic because we know from history that each 10 years are different. And life, politics, history is very dynamic. Everything can happen and not necessarily for the worse, for the best. But I'm sure that we'll survive because we proved our resilience. And I'm sure that even though next several years might be really hard, because let's not forget, we are waging the war of attrition. And it's difficult. But in 10 years, I'm much more optimistic, and I'm sure that Kyiv and Ukraine will be after rebuilding, after not only rebuilding, but also economic transformation, that it will remain and will be flourishing European capital. I'm sure that will be a member of the European Union and a NATO member. So in 10 years, I can bet on this, and I am sure that everything will be, if not perfect, but normal.
I hope very much that's your future too. Oleksandr Merezhko, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.